I remember the first time I saw her. Not just the image, not the coat she was wearing or the way her hair curled in the cold, but the feeling. Like something quiet had just changed in the world, and I was the only one who noticed. It was raining. Not the kind of rain that makes you run for cover. No, the slow kind. The kind that just falls, as if time itself were sighing. She was standing across the street, looking up at the sky, like it was telling her a secret. I don't know what made me stop. I had somewhere to be, I think. But suddenly, that didn't matter. There was this stillness in her, like she belonged to a different rhythm, slower, truer, and then she smiled. Not at me. Not really. She just smiled, like the kind of smile you give to the world when no one's watching. I didn't know her name. I didn't know anything about her. But I knew that if I walked away, I'd spend years wondering who she was. So I crossed the street. She turned. Our eyes met. And it wasn't fireworks or violins or angels singing. No, nothing like that. It was something smaller, more honest, like the silence between two waves. "Hi," I said, and she tilted her head just slightly, like she'd been waiting for me to say something. That was the beginning of what I still don't know. But I've spent a lifetime trying to understand what started in that moment and why some meetings feel like they've already happened long before they ever begin. I never quite knew what it was, that thing between us. Was it love or something quieter, older, like finding a song you already knew the words to, even if you'd never heard it before? She was never mine. Not in the way people talk about love. No labels, no promises, just moments, one after another, threaded by silence. We didn't talk much about what we were, maybe because we both knew if we tried to define it, we might lose it. Like naming a ghost and watching it disappear. There were times I wanted to ask her, "Do you feel it too?" But the words would catch in my chest, and I'd let them go. Because part of me was afraid she'd say yes, and another part was more afraid she'd say no. I remember a night. We were lying on the grass, not touching, just close. The kind of closeness where you can feel someone's breath without needing to turn your head. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "I wonder if there's a version of us out there that got everything right." I didn't answer, not because I didn't believe her, but because I did. I used to think about what it meant to love without claiming, to feel something so deep and still leave the door open. Maybe that was our kind of love, something you hold gently so it doesn't break. There were days when we didn't speak, not because we were angry, just full, like silence had become its own language. And in that stillness, everything was said. She once left me a note, folded, delicate, slipped into the back pocket of my coat. I didn't find it for weeks. It said, "Don't ask me where this is going. Just walk with me for a while." I kept that note, still have it somewhere. Faded now, but the words never really left me. We lived in the spaces between words, in the glances held too long, in the silence after laughter. And maybe that's why I never quite knew what it was, because it didn't need to be anything. It just was. When the world sleeps, let the silence stay. There were so many things she never said, not because she didn't care. At least, I don't think that's why, but because some people hold their feelings like a letter they're not sure they'll ever send. And I kept waiting for that letter, for a word, a sentence, a moment of clarity. It never came. I tried to meet her halfway, wrote often, asked softly, left doors open even when I wasn't sure she'd walk through. She would answer sometimes, but always from a distance, a kind of warmth that flickered just before it vanished. She had a way of making you feel close, then suddenly far, as if she were afraid that saying too much might unravel something she couldn't control. I remember the way she changed the subject, just when we were about to reach something true. Sometimes I'd find little notes tucked inside books, short sentences in her handwriting, leaning to the left like they were hesitating. I wish I could explain how it feels to miss you even when you're here. Orient, I hope you sleep well tonight, wherever your thoughts go. I'd sit by the window, sometimes with a letter half written in my lap, wondering if I was waiting for a version of her that only lived in silence. There was a kind of beauty in the mystery, yeah, but there was pain too, in the knowing that she felt something and chose not to name it. She once looked at me, eyes full of something I'll never have words for, and said, "You're good at feeling things," as if it was both a compliment and a warning. The days we spent together were full of softness. Even the silences had weight. There was a moment, I remember it so clearly. We were walking beside a river. Neither of us said a word. She just reached out and brushed her fingers against mine, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is how she speaks. I don't think she meant to leave things unsaid. Some people just speak in softness, in pauses, in how long they hold your gaze before looking away. She never said it, but it was there. In the way she lingered, in how her hands trembled just slightly when we touched, and sometimes what's left unspoken is just a quieter way of saying, I loved you too. When the world sleeps, let the silence stay. We hadn't seen each other in a long time, not by choice, but because life has a way of placing silence where words used to be. And then one day, I don't even know why, we crossed paths, not in a place that meant anything, not under any grand constellation, just there, by chance, two ghosts colliding in daylight. We sat for a while, talked carefully. There was warmth, laughter even, but also that familiar quiet, hiding between every sentence. Then, somewhere between the second cup of tea and the sun lowering behind the trees, she said, "There's a song I've been listening to. I don't know why, but it's made me think of you a lot." I smiled, surprised, and asked, "What kind of song?" She looked down at her hands, then back at me. Just a simple melody. It starts with a piano, very slow. And then this voice comes in, like it's remembering something. I felt something shift in the room. I said, "Wait, does it slow down in the second verse like it's holding its breath?" She blinked, smiled. Yes. We sat there stunned. Two people who hadn't spoken in months, who had walked through different days in different places, but carried the same song through the same silence. I told her then, when I heard it, I imagined us, somewhere far away in the snow, dancing, just the two of us. And for the first time, we weren't running anymore. She looked at me, softly, not sad, just honest. "That's beautiful," she said. "I imagined something different, though. When I heard it, I saw you, alone, in a quiet room, doing your things, and I wasn't there, but not because I didn't want to be. It's just, I didn't know how." Two hearts holding the same melody, but hearing it in different ways. I didn't know what to say, because in that moment, we were both right, and we were both apart. But something in me still believes, maybe always will, that love leaves echoes, and that song that night was one of them. A reminder that even in silence, even in separation, some part of us was still dancing. When the world sleeps, let the silence stay. There was a night, high on a hill where the sky was closer than usual, and the stars looked like they'd been waiting for us. We drove up there with no plan, no reason really, just two bodies pulled by something softer than gravity. I had packed some tea, made it at home, just for the two of us. It was still warm when we opened the thermos, and we sipped it with our hands wrapped around the cups, like they were little fires. You laughed a lot that night. I don't remember what I said. Maybe nothing. Maybe it was the cold. I remember lending you my jacket. It kept your smell for weeks. The silence that wrapped around us like a blanket instead of a wall. Then, I don't know how it started. We were dancing, no music, just your feet moving in the dark, mine trying to follow, and the stars above us spinning in rhythm. You kept whispering things I couldn't catch, and I kept smiling like I understood anyway. There was a moment you pressed your forehead to mine and everything else disappeared. The cold, the world, the part of me that always wonders when it's going to end. That night, it didn't feel like it ever would. We lay down in the grass eventually, out of breath, drunk on nothing but tea and touch and sky. You curled into me, head on my chest, your hair catching the light from the moon. And just before sleep took us, just before that last beautiful quiet, you said, with you, everything feels possible. I didn't answer, not with words. I just held you a little tighter, like maybe, if I didn't speak, the world would leave us there a little longer. And for once, it did. When the world sleeps, let the silence stay. It didn't happen all at once, the distance. It wasn't a door slamming or a message that never came. It was quieter than that. Like light slipping out of a room, inch by inch, without you noticing, until the shadows have taken over. She was still there. She smiled, she laughed. But her voice started landing softer, like it was afraid to stay too long. She used to write often, little notes, a sentence here or there. Then they became fewer, and then they stopped. We still saw each other, of course, but even when she sat beside me, I could feel the space between us widening. Not in anger, not in coldness, just retreat. There were pauses in the middle of sentences, moments where I could see her thoughts drifting elsewhere, and I never asked where, because asking would have meant naming something I wasn't ready to lose. One evening, I reached for her hand, not thinking, just reaching, and she held it, but only for a moment. Long enough to remember, but not long enough to stay. She said, I've been feeling a little far away lately. Not from you exactly, just from things. And I nodded because I loved her, and I didn't want her to feel wrong for drifting. But the truth is, I could feel her slipping like water through fingers that weren't gripping tightly enough. Or maybe they were, and she just needed to float. I remember that night clearly, not because anything broke, but because something loosened, and it never quite came back. There are many kinds of silence. Some are peaceful, some are protective, and some are the sound of someone quietly leaving while you're still looking at them. When the world sleeps, let the silence stay. It took us a year of circling each other, getting close, stepping back, reaching, retreating, saying too little, feeling too much. And then one day, we stopped running. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music, no fireworks. Just the sound of our breathing and the silence between heartbeats. We were walking somewhere quiet. I remember the grass and the way the wind moved through the trees like it was listening. You looked at me, not like someone uncertain, but like someone who had finally arrived. And I looked at you and saw everything I had been carrying finally drop to the ground. We stood still, not speaking, as if words would only get in the way. And for a moment, time stopped behaving like time. It stretched, folded, curled up around us like a blanket we didn't know we'd been waiting for. And then our foreheads touched like a quiet promise. And we kissed. Slow, certain, not as a question, but as an answer. It wasn't about passion or hunger. It was about peace. For the first time, I wasn't wondering what you felt, and you weren't afraid of being seen. We had been so many things, almosts, echoes, silences. But in that moment, we were only one thing. Here, you whispered something I'll never forget. With you, the world feels softer. And it did. The sky felt closer, the air felt kind, even my own name, if you'd said it, would have sounded different. Some kisses burn, some disappear, but this one stayed. Not on my lips, but in the way I understand what peace feels like when you stop hiding from love. When the world sleeps, let the silence stay. I still leave the door unlocked. Not because I forget, but because some part of me still thinks you'll walk through it like you used to, quietly. With that kind of smile that doesn't ask for permission to return. I still keep your cup, top shelf, far back, but clean. I tell myself it's just a habit, but I think we both know that's not the truth. It's strange how a house holds memory, how the corners keep the shape of someone's shadow, how silence shifts when it no longer belongs to just you. I still sit in the same chair, the one by the window. You liked it there, the way the light came in without asking. It's different now. Paler, maybe, colder, or maybe I am. There are days I don't think of you, but they're quiet in a different way. Not peaceful, not still, just hollow. I talk to you sometimes, not out loud, not fully, but in the way I do small things, the way I fold the blanket, the way I stir the tea, the way I close the book and pause on the last sentence. as if you might still finish it for me. I saw someone yesterday with your coat, same length, same color, same way it moved when they turned, and for one breath, just one dash, I thought it was you. I followed the shape, waited for the face, but it wasn't you. It never is. I keep wondering if you think of me, not always, just sometimes. In those little spaces between things, when the water boils, when the street goes quiet, when the sky turns the same color. It was that night on the hill. You said, with you, everything feels possible. But what happens when possibility becomes memory? I haven't heard your voice in years now, but I still remember how it sounded when you were sleepy. When you whispered something small just before falling into the dark. I wonder if you still whisper, and if so, who hears it now? Maybe this is the part where nothing happens, where things stay undone, unsaid, unfinished. Maybe this is what silence sounds like when it decides to stay. Or maybe you're already on your way back. When the world sleeps, let the silence stay. It snowed this morning. Not much, just a quiet fall like dust remembering how to dance. I stood by the window for a while, didn't say anything, didn't think much either. Just watched it land and melt and vanish. Funny how even snow doesn't want to stay anymore. She used to stand there on that same tile, hands wrapped around a cup. Didn't say much either, but I always knew when she was happy. She had a way of tilting her head when the light hit just right, like she was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. I wrote her a letter once. Didn't send it, still have it in the drawer. It says, I don't need you to come back. Just tell me the part of me that loved you was real. I think we all keep little ghosts, don't we? A scarf, a mug, the way someone said good night. Only once, but you remember it for 78 winters. She told me long before the end that with me, everything felt possible. I didn't know what to say at the time. Just smiled, held her hand. That was enough then. Now, I think about that a lot. Possibility. It sounds like such a young word. There are moments still when I set out 2 cups instead of 1, when I catch myself leaving the porch light on just a little longer. Old habits, or maybe just a way of saying, I remember. I saw the first snow and thought of her. Not sharply, not with pain, just a soft tug, like a thread still tied to something warm. She might be long gone now, far from here. Different life, different name, but I'd like to think she still pauses sometimes when it snows. And maybe, just maybe, she thinks of me too. No need for words, no need for letters. Some stories finish without endings, but they're stories all the same. And sometimes, when the house is still, when the snow falls right, when the air feels full with memory, I sit by the window and I wait, not for her. No, not anymore. Just for that feeling. The one that says she was here and it mattered. And I was never alone. Because even when silence filled the room, she was there. In the way the air moved, in the way the morning came slower, in the way I spoke less but meant more. She was there in the soft creases of my day, in the pauses between one step and the next, in the warmth of the tea I still make, just a little too sweet. And if the world ends in quiet, as I think it might, then I hope it ends like this. With snow falling outside the window and love still echoing in the spaces where words used to be. She was here and it mattered, and I was never alone, and I'm not now. Not really, not when she's still. In everything, the silence touches. When the world sleeps, let the silence stay. There are certain days that don't seem to belong to any season. Not quite autumn, not yet winter. The light feels held, as if time's trying to pause before it has to let go again. Today was one of those days. I walked to the lake, haven't been there in years. Took the long way around, through the trees where we used to pick the little blackberries. That stained her fingers and made her smile like a thief. The path is still there, though the roots have gotten bolder, and my knees don't quite know how to argue back. But I made it, step by step, memory by memory. I sat on the same bench, the one with the missing slat, the one we carved our initials into. Though I never told her, I went back the next day to carve a little heart beneath them. I thought about her, of course I did. Not in the sharp way anymore, more like a whisper you only hear when you're not trying to. I still don't know what it was we had. Not love, perhaps. Not fully, but not love either. It was something quieter, something that lived in between words. In the way she'd straighten the collar of my coat before I went out. In the way we didn't need music to dance. People ask me if I regret it, if I wish I had said more, stayed longer, written back sooner. Some connections are meant to live in the spaces they leave behind. I kept the last letter she sent, still unopened. It's in the drawer next to the window, under a stack of old postcards and a brass key. That doesn't open anything anymore. Sometimes I touch the envelope as if the words inside are still warm. A part of me wants to read it. Another part is afraid, not of what it says, but of what it doesn't. Because if she said goodbye, if she closed the door, then all I have left is the sound of it closing. But I never heard it. Not really, not in the way that matters. And so, in this house, in this old chair, in this heart that still stirs when it snows, the door never closed. It stayed ajar, just wide enough for a voice to slip through, or a memory, or maybe her. They say the past is a place you shouldn't live. I don't, not quite. But sometimes, on quiet evenings like this, I visit. I sit in its kitchen. I drink its tea, and I talk to someone who's no longer there. Not with sorrow, not with bitterness, just with presence. And maybe she visits too. Maybe in some mirror, in some other small forgotten town, she's sitting by her window, touching the same kind of silence. Maybe she never read my last letter either. Maybe that's how we stay together. Not by holding on, but by both letting go at the same time. I never did hear her footsteps again, but the door never closed. When the world sleeps, let the silence stay